We're so thrilled to have Dr. McKown with us. He is the founder and president of xSEL Labs, whose mission is to improve student outcomes by helping educators understand children's social emotional strengths and needs. xSEL Labs fulfills its mission by providing evidence-based assessments of student social emotional competencies and school climate. A leader in the field of SEL, Dr. McKown has written and spoken extensively on SEL with the goal of increasing the capacity of educators to use SEL assessments to support consistent and high quality SEL practices. Dr. McKown was the lead author on a report of the state of the field of SEL assessment. He's also the author of Assessing Student Social and Emotional Learning from Planning through Action. Now, as you all know, WPS is a leading independent publisher of test instruments and educational materials. We also, when we develop a test, we bring an author's idea to life. We answer research questions and we meet clinicians' needs. And ideally, we change, and our goal is to change an individual's life for the better. I am actually an employee of WPS. I am employed as an assessment consultant, and I've been with WPS for 3 years now, and my name is Donna Black, and I'll be hosting this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McKown.
Thank you, Donna. So today we're going to be talking with you about using social emotional competence assessment to support teaching, learning, and student success. Before we launch into the first slide, I want to say that say thank you to all of the attendees for putting your roles in the chat. I actually have found it incredibly illuminating. And by my very informal statistical analysis, the modal response is school psychologists. There are a bunch of SLPs, occupational therapists, school social workers, school counselors, in addition, in attendance. And I think that's really important to note because we're going to be talking about using competence assessment largely for tier 1 general education use. I'm a child clinical psychologist by training, so I really have a similar background to many of the attendees. I will say that from my training, and I think yours too, the focus is often on diagnosing problems that interfere with functioning and then developing a plan to remediate those problems. In this case, we're actually going to be talking about assessing competencies that we affirmatively want children to develop through the educational process and using the data from those assessments to guide instruction for everyone. So I say that because it's a slightly different mindset or framework than I was used to through my training, and that you might be used to through your training as well. So keep that in mind as we go through our presentation. Next slide, please, Donna. Okay, so just so you know what we're hoping that you get out of this is we want you to, number one, understand that social emotional competencies, the things that we want students to develop, can be assessed with the same rigor as academic competencies. We want you to understand the kinds of assessment tools that are available to measure these social and emotional competencies. Next slide, please. We will be describing for you a practice model wherein social emotional competence assessment guides largely tier 1, but also somewhat tier 2 instruction and measures student progress in response to instruction. It's very much consistent with an MTSS framework, which I think is the kind of conceptual link between strengths-based approaches to instruction and remediation-focused approaches to instruction. And finally, we're going to give you an example of how social emotional competence assessment can inform instructional decision making. Next slide, please. Okay, so just by way of framing, because SEL is talked about a lot these days, everybody means something slightly different, although I think that's getting better. By SEL broadly, what we mean is we're referring to the social and emotional competencies, including knowledge, skills, and dispositions that students need to interact effectively with others and to develop and deepen relationships and participate constructively in collective life. This is a very broad construal of SEL, and it incorporates things like the Castle model. But I think it's important to remember what SEL is all about. It's really about being able to connect with others in a positive way and participate positively and constructively in collective life. Next slide, please. So just by way of kind of framing broadly the place of assessment in educational practice, this is a slide from the State of the Field report that Donna referred to. On the very left-hand slide in the middle, you see the box that says standards on the top. I think it's like 19 states at this point have adopted standards that describe the social and emotional competencies that students in different grade levels should know and be able to demonstrate. So in the best of all worlds, there are some set of standards either developed by the state or the district that articulate the shared expectations of the competencies you want kids different grades to develop. Those standards in turn will inform what's taught. You want to teach the things that are in the standards. And to some degree, what happens at the district and classroom level should then feed back up to revisions of the standards, as happened in Washoe County, Nevada, who were incredibly innovative around SEL, and their SEL work informed Nevada's state level work. Those standards should also inform what's assessed. Okay, so what are you assessing? What competencies are you going to assess? Well, you want to assess the same things that are expected at the state level that are the targets of instruction in the classroom. Assessment should inform what's taught to whom at what point, and it should be able to measure progress in response to those instructional efforts. So there's in some ways, it's a very simple model, but it doesn't mean it happens. You know, I think that this is something that the more standards, teaching and learning and assessment are all going after the same thing, the more assessment is going to be able to constructively support teaching, learning, and student outcomes. All of this, by the way, the very top bar, the kind of peach colored bar, should be guided by a coherent model of what SEL is. And I think the Castle model really provides a nice common language for all of us to use. And then at the bottom, the sort of foundation is really professional learning, because SEL assessment, instruction, and standards are relatively new in the educational space. We feel that, but from pre-service all the way through in-service professional learning opportunities, educators need support in figuring out how to use assessment data, for example, to guide instruction. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. Next slide, please. So this is the Castle model that I was referring to. I think most of you will be familiar with it, but just in case, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning is an advocacy organization housed out of Chicago, and they've done a lot of the policy work that undergirds the standards in the 19 states I described. And in the middle, the colorful kind of wheel describes 5 broad competency areas that are really operationalized in state standards and operationalized in the assessments we're going to describe today. And they include self-awareness, which largely refers to understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and knowing your own emotions. Self-management, which really refers largely to the ability to voluntarily modulate your own emotions. So it's about emotion regulation and behavioral management skills as well. On the other side is the green social awareness is about understanding other people's thoughts and feelings. Relationship skills, it has a whole bunch of pieces, but a big part of it is the ability to resolve conflicts, to solve social problems as they come up, and responsible decision-making. In standards, that's usually operationalized as both kind of executive functioning, being able to organize, make smart decisions, and kind of ethical decision-making in the context of really challenging situations. Okay, next slide, please. So first, let's talk about the kinds of assessments that are available to you. If you heard this, you said, okay, I want to know how I can actually assess these competencies. They're really important competencies. Part of my work as a school psychologist or whatever your role is supporting general educators. What's available to me? Well, on the left-hand side, you have kind of indirect assessment strategies. One is self-report. And this is probably the most commonly used SEL assessment strategy currently. These are surveys that largely ask kids questions about their own competencies. So for example, I know how to calm down when I'm mad. Not at all true to extremely true. Okay, so kids are basically making a judgment call about their own competencies. The second one down is teacher report or teacher rating scales. This is where teachers rate the frequency of behaviors that reflect social emotional competencies, such as those in the Castle model. Here's an example: can calm down when upset. So rating an individual child's ability to calm down when upset from almost never to almost always. Very commonly used strategy in the Selfie, which we'll describe later in this presentation, is a wonderful example of a teacher rating scale. On the right-hand side, upper right is a direct assessment. Now, direct assessment is really about not having children make a judgment call about their own competencies or a teacher rate the student's competencies, but a child showing what they know, demonstrating their competence by solving challenging tasks. You know, here's an analogy. If you wanted to know about a child's math skills, there are lots of different ways you could measure math. You could have them fill out, for example, a self-report survey saying, rating their own ability to do single column multiplication, two column multiplication. You'd get some information from that. But a math test is, you know, kids actually have problems they have to solve in the mathematical domain, and their performance on the math test gives you a sense of where their strengths and where their needs are. Similarly, with direct assessment, kids are showing what they know. In this example, this slide is an emotion recognition or a task, which is part of Castle's social awareness. And the question that a child has to answer is, what's the girl feeling? Is she happy, sad, angry, scared, or just okay? There's a right and a wrong answer. So again, kids are showing what they know by performing, by responding to challenging tasks. And then at the bottom right are administrative records, which are not really indirect or direct assessments. It's things like office discipline referrals, suspension rates, things like that, which to me are a kind of distal indicator of social emotional competence and other things, for example, school policies and practices. So while they can be helpful to some degree, I think they're a kind of a more gross estimate of social emotional competence. You want, in my view, something that's getting either directly or indirectly at the skills that you're trying to nurture. And administrative records usually don't get that fine-tuned a sense of things. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Donna to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. McKown. Okay, so today, Dr. McKown is going to spend some time talking with you about two different types of assessment instruments. We're going to use these just for purposes of illustration. Whichever type of instrument you choose as a school to use, the process of assessment is going to remain the same. But we're going to use these instruments just to illustrate that process. When choosing an instrument, what's important for you to remember is you should consider what you really want to measure. And Dr. McKown talked about this in terms of the competencies. You also should give consideration to whether or not the instrument is culturally relevant for the population of students that you serve, whether it is developmentally appropriate, and if the research supports its intended use. Most importantly, the results of the assessment should be used responsibly and in accordance with the context of your school's policies and practices. One of the instruments I want to start with is the Selfie Screener that Dr. McKown previously mentioned. This will illustrate the process as a screener. It's an indirect rating scale like the ones he described before, and it can be completed by a teacher, a parent, or a student using a self-report. The Selfie Screener is aligned directly with the Castle core competencies, and it assesses all 5 of those competencies, including self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So the Selfie Screener is completely digital, it's web-based, and it's completed online. It includes a parent and a teacher rating form, as well as a self-report. It's an indirect measure of SEL competencies like the one described by Dr. McKown, and it can provide schools with an efficient method for obtaining information about the students' competencies. A teacher or a parent can complete the rating scale in less than 1 minute for each student. So a full class of students could be rated in approximately 20 to 30 minutes. What the results will allow schools to do is tailor their instruction so they can address the areas of critical need or the areas of greatest need. It's not intended as a diagnostic tool. It helps to identify the core competencies where the greatest needs exist, so your instructional program can target those areas where explicit instruction is needed. Then you can reinforce the development and generalization of those skills through integrated strategies and efforts. It also can assist the school in monitoring progress of students, as well as monitoring the progress of their instructional program. There's also a full form available with the Selfie, and it allows schools to perform more further exploration of student competencies. It can help to guide that instructional program, as I mentioned previously, but it also can be used to help examine the effectiveness of the program. Some schools might choose to use it to develop targeted goals and interventions for individual students as part of a comprehensive evaluation of SEL competencies. And like the Selfie Screener, the full form is an indirect measure, as we previously discussed, and it allows schools to gather more information about competencies so that they can effectively tailor their instruction. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. McKown so he can discuss the different types of assessments that actually he's going to talk about the direct assessment next.
Thank you, Donna. So let me give you just a quick orientation to SELWeb, the direct assessment of social and emotional competencies. SELWeb is a web-based tool that children interact with independently. They largely wear headphones because it's largely narrated. And they interact with a series of tasks where, again, they have to show their competencies. Takes about a half an hour to complete and is available in English and in Spanish. SELWeb is also norm referenced, so the final scores compare a child's raw score performance to the average performance of their age mates around the country. And what this screen shows is screenshots from several of the modules. The upper left module is an early elementary module measuring children's ability to recognize others' emotions, emotion recognition, which is part of CASEL's social awareness. And again, kids look at pictures of faces and say whether each face is happy, sad, angry, scared, or just okay. Each of the faces has a slightly, some are very obvious, some are subtler expressions, so it really gets at the sensitivity children have to nuanced emotion displays. On the upper right is an example of a social perspective taking module. And social perspective taking, the ability to understand other people's intentions or points of view is also part of CASEL's social awareness. And the way this works is children hear brief stories that are illustrated about commonplace situations. In this case, this is about a birthday party. And they answer questions about a story character's words or actions or intentions. And to get the question right, children have to understand the point of view or intentions of one of the characters. So it's a story-based way of getting at how well kids can see things from another person's point of view. On the lower left, you see an example of a screenshot from our social problem solving modules. And social problem solving is kind of straddles CASEL's relationship skills and responsible decision making. And the way we assess this competence in SELWeb is we tell kids about hypothetical, challenging social situations. We ask them to imagine they were in the situation, and then we ask a series of questions about how would they want it to turn out. So we get at their sort of goal preferences. Would they rather kind of get back at the other child? Would they like to, get along and play? In this case, this is a story about peer entry. A child goes up to an ongoing activity and asks to join, and they don't say anything back. We also ask about solution preferences. What would you do in that situation? And then we ask, if you did that, what would happen next? So getting them to predict the consequences of their behavior. And then in the lower right, we have an example of one of our self-control modules. And this is an emotion regulation knowledge task where we tell children about hypothetical situations where somebody might feel sad or disappointed or upset or even overly excited. and then ask them what they could do to feel better and give a number of emotion regulation strategies, some of which are more likely to be effective than others. So this is really about children's knowledge of the things that are in their sphere of influence to calm themselves when upset. So we have multiple different modules, takes about a half an hour to complete, and it covers emotion recognition, social perspective taking, social problem solving, and self-control, which are components of the CASEL 5 competencies. We're also piloting a self-awareness module this year. Next slide, please, Donna. So I think I just covered this part. These are the 4 competencies SEL Web's designed to assess. So let's go into a case study. Let's imagine that you wanted to answer the following questions. And in fact, the last part, imagine that you were using an SEL program called Ruler. This is a Tier 1 universal curriculum out of the Yale Center on Emotional Intelligence. It's designed to be delivered by the general ed teacher. Everybody gets instruction on social emotional competencies. And you want to know at the beginning of the year, what social emotional competencies have students mastered? What should be the focus of instruction? How should you use the Ruler program and other resources to support students, to build on the strengths you've identified and address the needs? And then finally, you want to know how students' competencies are changing over time in response to those efforts. You can use the SELC and SEL Web in the same ways. So we'll describe a sort of practice model in which you could integrate either of these assessments or conceivably other assessments to answer these questions. Next slide, please. So this page, it's a little hard to read, I apologize, but this is basically a program alignment document that shows the relationship between the scope and sequence of the Ruler curriculum and the competencies SEL Web's designed to assess. The way this works is each row in this table is one of the lessons in the Ruler scope and sequence. Each column is one of the competencies SEL Web is designed to assess. Wherever there's a check mark, it means that lesson was one of the targets of instruction in the lesson. Wherever there are 2 check marks, it means that competence was the main target of instruction in that lesson. So a couple of things to note here. One is that pretty much every Ruler lesson is designed to teach at least one of the competencies SEL Web's designed to assess. And every one of the competencies SEL Web's designed to assess has multiple lessons that target that competence. We have program alignments for a number of different programs, but this just gives you a sense of how you might use the assessment data to guide instruction. So for example, let's imagine the 3rd column over the light blue column is social problem solving. Let's imagine you were a classroom teacher and you found that there were a lot of students who had struggles in social problem solving. You would notice that the social problem solving lessons don't come until the end of the scope and sequence. So hopefully this would stimulate a productive discussion about how might I, as a classroom teacher, give kids a chance to learn and practice that competence even before we reach that part in the scope and sequence. Next slide, please. And similarly for the SELC, you can see that we have a comparable program alignment. This shows the relationship between the 2nd step elementary curriculum. 2nd step's another wonderful evidence-based universal SEL program, and the SELC screener competencies. And like with SEL Web and Ruler, you can see that that pretty much every lesson or unit in 2nd step is measured. The targets of instruction in those units are measured by SELC, and every competence that SELC is designed to measure is the target of instruction in one or more of the units. So you can use this kind of guide similarly to say, hey, how might I use what I learned from the SELC about student strengths and needs to guide my use of the 2nd step program and other SEL resources that we're using both universally and for more targeted instruction. Next slide, please, Donna. So here's the general practice model that we want you to consider. And it's very consistent with the kind of MTSS model and should be familiar to many of you. We think that it's wise to begin the year by assessing social emotional learning skills using the SELC, using SEL Web, hopefully one of those 2 or another competence assessment. Then the second step would be to review the data. And this is something that you all have particular expertise on as school psychologists and SLPs, school social workers, counselors. You're used to data about students. A lot of your colleagues are not. So I hope to encourage everybody here to promote positive and constructive data use practices around SEL assessment data, because it's not a given that this will happen in a school district. That's a whole other webinar. But what we hope that you will do is that the team, a grade level team, for example, will sit down with the data and review where the strengths are, review where the needs are at a school, grade level, classroom level, and individual level. Use what you learn about student strengths and needs to make decisions about how you're going to build on the strengths and address the needs. And then in step 3, execute that plan, teach the skills through both formal curricula and other strategies of infusion throughout the school day. After a period of instruction, you'll go to reassess SEL skills, that's step 4. And then number 5, review the data to see where students progressed, where they didn't progress, and then use learnings from that discussion to make decisions about how to proceed next. And then repeat that process again in the fall. It's possible to do with the CELSI, especially because it's a teacher rating scale, you could do more periodic progress monitoring kinds of dipstick assessments to make sure things are going in the right direction. With CELWeb, which is constructed more like a summative assessment, you can do a fall, winter, and spring assessment, kind of like you'd use the MAP test for reading benchmarking and progress monitoring. Same principle for each assessment. All right, next slide, please, Donna. Oh, actually, I guess I walked through this part, so you can skip to the next. Okay, so let's imagine you had done the first wave of assessment in the fall, and you have your assessment data. This is an example of a report from CELWeb. You'd have similar data from CELSI. And this report, each of the bars, it's a little hard to see, but each of the bars reflects a distinct competence. You have an overall score, a bar that reflects emotion recognition, social perspective taking, social problem solving, and self-control. And each bar shows the percentage of students that scored well above average, that's in the very light green. In the average range, that's in the next darkest green. A little below average, which is the slightly dark green, and very well below average, which is the very dark green. Now, this is an example of a report for a classroom teacher. And what I want you to see is that there are peaks and valleys across the different competencies. And so you could use this aggregated data to understand the 26 students in this teacher's class. And what I want to point out is a couple of things. One is that for this group of students, emotion recognition is a relative strength because there are more students, a higher proportion of students are in that light green and very light green than in the dark green. In contrast, social problem solving, which is the 4th bar from the left, has more students in the dark green and very dark green. So that reflects an area of relative need. Okay, so you can sort of say, okay, for universal instruction, if I really want to address the group's needs, I kind of want to hit social problem solving a little bit harder than these other competency areas. Next slide, please. So then you would say, in light of this assessment data, how might you use your program resources to build on student strengths and needs? Well, you're using the ruler program, and I sort of foreshadowed this a little bit, but you see that if you wanted to target problem solving for this classroom, those lessons are near the end of the scope and sequence. So the question is, could you preview those lessons? You don't want to break the scope and sequence, but give kids a chance to kind of get a head start on that. And or are there external resources? There are lots of programs that focus on social problem solving specifically. Could you bring those in a supplementary way to give kids an extra chance to reinforce and learn those competencies even before you reach that point in the scope and sequence? Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's the question of how might you integrate the SEL instruction with academic instruction. Because let's say you have 15 minutes of SEL lessons every day, which would be pretty darn good. Do you think kids are really going to learn everything they need to learn in 15 minutes a day? Well, I think they're going to learn something, but ideally you have opportunities throughout the school day to reinforce those competencies. So here's a slide that shows examples of ways you might do that. So for social problem solving, you could think of ways to integrate social problem solving competence reinforcement and literacy fairly straightforwardly. Every book that's ever been written that's any good includes conflicts between people or problems between people. And so when those problems come up in the context of literacy, you could use a problem-solving framework to prompt kids. You could say, what do you think the problem is between these two characters? That's problem identification. What could you do in that situation? That's kind of solution generation. What are the pros and cons of those solutions? What do you think this person should do? What do you think he or she will do? If they did that, what would happen next? So you're basically using a problem-solving framework to probe about literacy. It's literacy and SEL. It's not one or the other. I think that there are ways to develop these kinds of prompts for specific social emotional competencies, particularly through literacy, that could be very powerful ways and simple and doable ways to integrate SEL with academics. A second strategy is, I'm going to call it a pop quiz. Teachers could easily select images from the internet of people engaged in what are clearly challenging conversations, for example, and you could go through the same series of prompts to get kids to talk about what they think the problem is, what could be done. It's a chance both to give kids a chance to strengthen those muscles, but also the teacher gets some formative assessment, informal assessment about where students are in their social problem solving skills. And then finally, probably the most powerful way to reinforce social emotional competencies is in situ or kind of teachable moments. When conflicts come up between students or disagreements come up, teachers can act as a coach and use the same kinds of problem solving prompts to help children go through understanding the nature of the problem they're having with each other and developing a range of solutions that they could try to deploy to make things go better. That's where the action is, right? That's where the heat of the moment is, and where I think students tend to benefit the most from SEL instruction. But it's not an either or. Explicit instruction, reinforcement throughout the school day, and teachable moments is really the combination that I think is going to yield the greatest benefit over time. And that's true whether you're using SEL Web or using the SEL-C to understand student strengths and needs and make decisions about what to focus on in explicit instruction and informal opportunities throughout the day. Next slide, please. So then you've made some decisions. You're going to focus on social problem solving. You're going to preview some of those ruler lessons. You're going to use some of those problem solving focused prompts in literacy, pop quizzes, and teachable moments. You're going to execute that plan. And so this is, you see both the program alignment document and the table that showed the sort of instructional infusion strategies there. You're going to use both of those things. And then after a period of instruction, next slide, please, you're going to reassess and take a look at the data. And then the next slide, I think, has maybe change over time. So this is a change over time chart in that same classroom. And what you see is, again, from left to right, the different competencies SEL Web's designed to assess. And each of the pairs of bars shows fall performance on the left and spring performance on the right. So if you look, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth from the left is the social problem solving competencies. And you see the leftmost bar there. Again, that's the fall performance where a lot of kids were struggling with social problem solving. The right bar in that pair is the spring performance, and you see there are still students with challenges, but there was substantial movement towards the average range or above. So if you're a teacher, you can say, okay, things were really going in the direction that I wanted. And it doesn't always look like this. Sometimes things are flat, sometimes things vary from competence to competence. But the hope is that this would stimulate some discussion about, where did things go where in the direction I wanted them to, and where can we still make efforts at a tier 1 or tier 2 level to make improvements. And you can do the same thing, same kind of thing with SELC. And the SELC again has the advantage of being able to be used for periodic program or progress monitoring more frequently than 2 or 3 times a year. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes the formal part of our presentation, and we wonder if you have any questions for us.
There are a few questions in the Q&A box. I'll just cover those real quickly. I think this first one is for you, Clark. I'm not sure if this is referring to SELWeb, but the question is audio captioned for students with hearing loss?
That is a good question, and it's not actually, though we probably should do that.
And then the next question, again, most of these are about the instruments, and this one asks, is norming including children on the spectrum?
For SELWeb, at least, we normed with a general education population, so it's not normed for autism spectrum particularly. However, we have conducted a couple of studies where we administered SELWeb to high-functioning children on the spectrum, and we have some pretty good evidence that it works the same way, similar score reliability, similar evidence of validity for kids on the spectrum. So for at least that special population, we feel pretty confident that you would get a good read of the strengths and needs of kids on the spectrum. By the way, one of the interesting things is that kids on the spectrum, they can have very different profiles. Some kids on the spectrum read faces really well, some don't. Most have a hard time with social perspective taking, some don't. So I think it can provide some good descriptive data for those kids.
As far as the SELC, that instrument is still in its pilot phase. And the next question really relates to the SELC. They're asking if I can tell you the psychometric properties of the SELC. Since it is in its pilot phase, we are still collecting data on it. The screener itself is not, as with most screeners, they're not normed because it is not necessary to norm a screener, but the full form will be normed, and we are still collecting the data on that. If you're interested in that pilot, I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. The age range for the SELWeb, can you tell us that, Clark?
Yes, so for SELWeb actually comes in 2 versions, an early elementary assessment that spans kindergarten through 3rd grade, and a late elementary assessment that spans 4th through 6th grade. I have a university appointment in addition to my xSEL labs work, and through the university, we've recently received funding to develop a middle school version of SELWeb as well. So that's on the horizon.
Okay. And the next question has to do with the SELWeb. How was it normed?
We administered the assessment to, for SELWeb early elementary, I think it was 3,200 and change children from school districts around the country. And it was a really diverse sample of kids ethnically and socioeconomically. And it oversampled Latinx children, slightly undersampled white children compared to census demographics. So we weighted the scores to approximate the census demographics that were in play at that time, and then use that children's performance, raw score performance in that sample as the sort of benchmark for judging individual student performance subsequently.
Okay, great. And the next question is about the SELC. The question is about the age range. The SELC is designed for ages 2 through 21. And then there's another question here about the use of these measures in the context of a neuropsychological evaluation. I'll address that from a SELC perspective. The SELC is not designed as a diagnostic tool. It's really designed to guide and tailor instruction. But with any type of assessment, that can be anecdotal data that can certainly assist in decision making. Dr. McKown, you want to add to that?
I couldn't have said it better myself, Donna, and the exact same sort of caveats apply to SELWeb. It really isn't, you can't use SELWeb data to say a child does or does not meet diagnostic criteria for a particular disorder, or should not be assigned to a special ed classroom, for example. but it can provide descriptive data that could be helpful in rounding out the picture as part of a neuropsych assessment. But again, like the SEL Web is really designed for guiding instructional practice at a tier 1 or tier 2 level.
Okay, and here's another question about someone who works with a neurodivergent population, and they find that the CASEL competencies have to be broken down into component skills to properly assess. Is there a version for this out there? That's kind of a loaded question. It's difficult to address that because CASEL standards, the competencies are well defined by CASEL. And depending upon the framework that your school chooses, if you haven't chosen the CASEL framework, then other frameworks also have competencies defined differently, although they all overlap somewhat. So breaking those down into component parts would really depend upon how the competencies are defined. So I'll let Dr. McKown add to that.
I agree with that. And there was a lot in that question. I do think that the CASEL competencies, if you just look at the label, like social awareness, there's a lot in social awareness, right? And so in some ways we try to address that in developing SEL by operationalizing the competencies into measurable components that would be informative. So social awareness includes, in our assessment, understanding others' emotions, understanding others' perspectives. And so that's kind of how we dealt with that problem. Now, are there other pieces of social awareness that are worthwhile? Absolutely. And I think there's some really constructive conversation going on right now about what the constituent elements of the CASEL competencies are or should be. In fact, CASEL recently released a revised set of definitions of their competencies that include a greater consideration of diversity, equity, and inclusion kinds of matters. So self-awareness might include, for example, not just understanding my own strengths and weaknesses, understanding my own emotions, but understanding my own implicit biases. So it's a little bit of an issue that's under consideration, but I agree with the fact that really need to operationalize it specifically and have the measurement strategy follow from that.
Okay, another question has to do with suggested interventions like direct instruction, pop quizzes, or situations. Are they included with the assessment results? Neither of the instruments includes direct intervention suggestions. I think that what's important to remember is that whatever program or whatever curriculum you choose, it should be aligned with those results you get from that assessment. So use your data to guide the instruction and to guide the types of lessons you need to be instructing on. I think that's the intent of these two instruments, is to help tailor and guide that instruction.
I totally agree. And both instruments, mostly for better, are program agnostic. So they can be used alongside a large number of instructional programs and curricular resources constructively. I think WPS and xSEL labs are similar in that we really want to provide the most high quality assessments possible. So at least for xSEL labs, we decided early on, we're going to be really, really good at assessment and help our partners, of course, link what they learn to what they can do. But others have done a great job of developing interventions and curricula. So let them do what they do well, and we'll support their programs by providing good data. Same with the SELC. Well
said. Okay, so there are several more questions. I'm going to try to get through as many of them as we can before we run out of time. This one has to do with the question is, how do we consider cultural relevance for children whose ethnicity may not be in the norm group? I can speak to the Selfie. I know that during the pilot phase, the data that's being collected and has been collected will closely mimic the census data, so that we'll make every attempt to make sure that every child's ethnicity is included according to, it will be reflective of the census data. Dr. McKown?
Yeah, and similarly with SELWeb, again, the norming group was very heterogeneous in terms of ethnicity and socioeconomic status. That's one piece of it. The other is the question of measurement equivalence. Does the assessment work the same way for kids from different groups? And we've done extensive studies to look at whether the scores that SELWeb produces have the same meaning in terms of what they say about a child's level of competence using confirmatory factor analysis approaches and item response theory kinds of approaches. And we find strong evidence that across ethnicity, gender, and language form, English or Spanish, the scores really have the same meaning for kids. So I feel confident that the assessment gives you unbiased results. It's based on the heterogeneous group. Does it cover everything that's relevant for all groups? No, I don't think so. And that's a sort of area that I think the field is engaging in very productive discussions around, like what are the competencies that should be the targets of instruction? Should, for example, code switching be a social emotional competence that's assessed? Because kids of color largely often have to operate by different cultural rules in school and at home. It's not currently, and we don't measure it. So I think that's something we've got to work out as we move on. But in terms of what's measured by SELWeb, we feel confident that it provides an unbiased assessment of the competencies it's designed to measure.
Great, thank you. The next question has to do with different languages. Is the Spanish assessment or the screener normed for bilingual English-Spanish students or Spanish monolingual students? The Selfie Screener is available in Spanish as well as several other languages, multiple languages. Again, the screener is not a normed instrument. Most screeners are not typically normed because they're used for instructional purposes and to guide that and tailor that instruction. I think, isn't the SELWeb available also in Spanish, Dr. McKown?
It is. It's available in English and in Spanish. And again, we've done these measurement equivalence studies to show that the scores are comparable whether a child takes the assessment in English or in Spanish.
Okay. And then last, how do you recommend we ask our school district for buy-in regarding the screener as an MTSS tool to guide SEL instruction? That's another one of those questions that it's kind of difficult to answer that. It is difficult to get buy-in from school districts sometimes regarding SEL and assessment of SEL. I think there's a lot of research out there to show that social emotional learning can impact and influence your achievement. Improved achievement scores can be obtained, and certainly there's a lot of support for addressing pro-social behaviors through social emotional learning. So that's all the questions I have so far. Dr. McKown, did you have anything else you'd like to add before we move on?
Well, just in terms of the buy-in, I think about the Arthur Ashe quote of, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And buy-in is a different thing if a school district has not ever talked about or expressed a priority on social emotional learning compared to a school district that says SEL is in our strategic plan. We're going to make sure that SEL is part of instruction. We've adopted a program, but we're not quite sure how to assess it. In the first case, you have a lot of work to do to sort of get the conversation going. In the second case, it's really about making the case that assessment data can support teaching, learning, and student outcomes and showing how that can work. So it really depends on the specifics of kind of where you are in that readiness arc, readiness to adopt from the very beginning to, we're talking about this a lot.
Good. So one more question just came in, and this has to do with an interest in SEL competencies as a precursor reading comprehension skills. Could the Selfie help us assess early reading comprehension as well as SEL development? The Selfie is not directly going to assess reading comprehension or early reading comprehension skills, but I think what we do need to address is the need to assess SEL skills in terms of student engagement. If children are socially and emotionally ready to learn, then they're certainly going to be much more engaged in the learning process, which will in turn impact their ability to learn and achieve whatever the academic subject is. So really, social and emotional competencies are really so relevant to learning because children don't learn in isolation. It is a social process. It is an emotional process. And when they're ready to learn and when their social and emotional skills are developing appropriately, then they are more attentive and more engaged in the learning process. Dr. McKown, want to add anything to that?
I don't think I could have said it better myself, so no, I'm not going to add anything to it.
Okay, a couple more coming here. What SEL programs are aligned with the Selfie other than Writer? I think they meant Ruler. There are several. The program itself is not aligned to Selfie is aligned to the CASEL framework. So if programs are aligned with the CASEL framework, or if there are programs who are addressing those competencies that CASEL has established, then the Selfie will meet your needs there. And that's all of the questions. So I'm going to complete the slide deck because we're about running out of time. We got about 9 more minutes here, but we've got some more information to provide you. If you want to learn more about the Selfie, you can join our mailing list, stay up to date on all of our webinars, and there is also a page that we have published that if you want to go there, here's the link to it. And through that page, you can keep up to date with what's going on with SEL and particularly with the Selfie. If you're not familiar, if you haven't done so, you want to check out our telepractice page, because this is where you can find access to all of our recorded webinars, and this is where this recorded webinar will be up. Once it's uploaded, will be accessible here. There are also a number of resources that WPS has available to you. In addition to that telepractice page, we have our online evaluation system. There's a YouTube channel and other resources here, all available to you. And we also have a number of assessment consultants at WPS who are ready and willing to help you. Should you have questions or need information about any of our products or any of our webinars, then your assessment consultants are here to help you. This lists all of the consultants here, and if you don't know who your consultant is, then this map can help you to identify the persons you need to contact. So depending on which state you reside in, if you can find your state on the map, then the person, it's all color coded there. So the person that you would need to consult with is listed here as well. Lastly, we have one more resource for you, and we would like to hear from you. If you want to contact us, you can call us by phone, or you can email us and get on our email list here. And we'll provide you with answer any questions you might have and provide you with any information that you need with regard to SEL or any of the other products that we offer as well. By submitting this form, we can follow up with you. And that concludes today's workshop. Here's Dr. McKown's contact information. And I just want to close by thanking Dr. McKown for this opportunity to learn from him. We've enjoyed having you here with us, and we look forward to hearing from all of you.
And I just want to thank WPS for including me and Donna for your collaboration on this presentation. Thank you everybody for coming.
That concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone.